Really want to be.
We'll get started now.
Yes.
Okay, so we are going to get started. I'm going to close this door real quick.
Holy cows.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today, and thank you to all of you who were able to attend last night. It was a beautiful evening. It was really cool. So thank you. We appreciate you. All right, so we'll get started with this morning's program. And our speaker this morning is Superintendent Megan Dagenfelder. Thank you. And Superintendent and Department of Education also sponsored our breakfast this morning. So thank you for that as well. All right, so Megan, is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. Was elected as Wyoming State Superintendent of Public Instruction in November of 2022, making her one of the youngest elected statewide officials in Wyoming history. So awesome. Very cool. Megan grew up in a sixth-generation ranching family in Casper and graduated from the University of Wyoming with a bachelor's degree in economics and political science. Megan also holds a master's degree in economics from the University of International Business and Economics in Beijing, China. You studied over there? That's so cool. Okay. So much I'm learning about you that I didn't know. Megan has nearly a decade of private sector experience in the fields of coal and oil and gas. She also previously served in the cabinet level position of Chief Policy Officer at the Wyoming Department of Education under Superintendent Jillian Balow. Megan volunteers on several nonprofit boards and in her church. And this is so cool. She is the University of Wyoming's women's rugby coach. So cool. Anyway, please help me welcome Superintendent Megan Dagenfelder.
Thank you. Thank you, Annie. Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. And I don't know if you guys want to move in, feel free to, if you're good back there, whatever's easy. Okay, I got a thumbs up, so we're good. You can hear me. All right, great. Well, it's really an honor to be here today and to be visiting with all of you. Come this way. Okay. Right here.
And then that's the camera.
Okay, perfect. Sorry. Hi, guys. I'm really glad we have this option because as we know, Wyoming roads are a challenge this time of year. It's really great to be with you all today. I participated in To Leap into Leadership several times over the years. And so it's really kind of coming full circle, speaking now as an elected official. And so it's really neat to see, the growth of this program and how it's continued over the years. So my plan for today is to just kind of have a really casual conversation with you all, tell you a little bit about my story, how I got to run for statewide election, and then kind of about the role in education and what my duties are and what some of my initiatives are. And then would love to just open it up for any questions. I know you all have been discussing a lot about campaigning and running for office and being a female. And so just happy to help out however I can in that discussion. So as Annie mentioned in my bio, I grew up in Casper. I come from a sixth-generation ranching family. My family has a ranch just west of the Casper Airport. And so grew up in that environment. And then with the other side of my family being multi-generational in the oil and gas industry. So deeply rooted here in Wyoming and in our key industries, really grew up with that and around the dining room table, that the agriculture and the mineral industry, the importance of those to the state of Wyoming. And so went through the public school system. I am who I am because of public schools in Wyoming. Graduated in Casper, went on to the University of Wyoming, which was an incredible opportunity. And, I was very, very fortunate to grow up with a very strong male mentor in my father. And he really is to thank for a lot of, where I've gone with my life. And I'm just so grateful to have a mentor like that really pushed me. And from early on, at 12 years old, he had me out hunting my first big game animal on the ranch and really pushed me to do everything that my two brothers could do. And actually it turned out that they didn't really have a passion for hunting. I do. And so it's been kind of fun that's become our hobby together. And so he really made a point that all three of us, no matter girls or boys, would all have those exact same opportunities. And he also taught me a couple things that really stay true to me today. And I even catch myself thinking about in my current role. Number one, he always taught me that never apologize for your place in the room. He said, there's too many women that I've worked around that start their sentence with, this might sound silly, but, or this might be a dumb question, but, or this is crazy. And making apologies, making excuses for their role in the room and what they have to say. He said, never, ever do that. Be confident in what you have to say. Be confident in the questions that you have, because you have just as much of a right to be there as anyone else. He also brought me up in really strong faith, which for me, I'm a very devout Christian, and that has been a huge part of my entire journey. And so I have him to thank for that. And he also taught me, which this isn't really related to politics, but really to women in the workforce. He said, always, always, always negotiate your salary. Never accept that first offer, because they're not going to remove the offer if you ask. The worst they'll say is no. And every position that I've held, that has stayed true. And I've always gotten more than what was first offered to me. And I think as women, too often, we're grateful for that. It might even be higher than our expectation. And so we just don't negotiate. And so that's one thing that I've tried to really hold true as well. So those kind of values were really instilled in me with my father. And I'm just so grateful for that, because I think that started me off in the right direction. From a young age, I got really involved into politics and into Wyoming. I remember walking in parades for gubernatorial candidates when I was in elementary school, ran for elementary student council, and I was a junior high school page at the Republican State Convention. And so the Republican Party, those ideals have always been really ingrained in my life. Was really involved at a young age in that. And so that's kind of what got my bug for politics, and just being around that. And even being, like I said, you know, an eighth grader, a page at the Republican convention, seeing how those bodies work together, seeing how these people did and what those values were important to those people. That really shaped who I was, and started even in high school. I volunteered on some statewide campaigns, and would just travel around and just be a part of that experience. And again, just part of, you know, Republican candidates and the party, and that really shaped who I was, you know, going into college. And so went to the University of Wyoming, was unsure about that. You know, a lot of young people want to get out of the state, and I try very hard to convince them not to, from my experience, but really just dove into everything at the University of Wyoming, got involved in every single club and opportunity that I could. And looking back now, not all of those stuck, but all of those relationships did. And they came back into play when I decided to run for state office. But got involved in everything and tried everything to see what fit, what I was passionate about. Continued with conservative politics, worked on many campaigns during college. I actually was on Cynthia Lummis's staff when she first ran for Congress. And that was a fantastic experience, traveling the state with her and learning the ropes and what it was like to be a female running for office in that role. Was really involved in college Republicans on campus, and really from an early age at that point, pushing for my conservative beliefs on a college campus, which was difficult. And I think in that regard, I was a minority in a sense, and was really the school newspaper was not a big fan of mine. There were a lot of caricatures. There were a lot of negative articles about me, but I think kind of set me up to what I had experienced in running the statewide campaign. And so now in hindsight, there were a lot of tears, but really grateful for that experience. And so anyway, was elected student body president at the University of Wyoming. Was a leader in college Republicans, was captain of my rugby team. I mean, just dove into everything, which was really great. And I can honestly say I soaked up that college experience. I also studied abroad. I received my master's degree abroad, moved to a foreign country where I didn't know a soul. I got off that plane. I didn't know a single person. I didn't hardly speak the language at all. It was one of the most difficult times in my life to figure out how you overcome that. And especially in a country that has such different beliefs than what you hold so dear. I shared that my faith is a really large part of who I am, showing my passport to go to church because it's forbidden for nationals to be Christians. And so those kind of things just really, I think, strengthened my beliefs and values in our political system. And so anyway, was just diving into everything. I mean, really kind of setting myself up. I always knew I wanted, to go into public service and do this sort of thing. But as much as you can control a situation and do what you want with that, God has other plans. Things are going to be difficult and those challenges come. And I think this next part of my life was what was the most difficult for me and probably the largest time of lesson learning. So at 21 years old, my life was right before me and I was diagnosed with cancer. And I think in that time, recognizing, you can either go into just that dark place and kind of accept what's happened to you, what you're dealing with, or embrace what's in your control, what you can control. And that was really difficult, I think, to process as any type of person when you have that kind of diagnosis, especially as a young person, and try to see how that shifts your life and how that changes the trajectory. And there was a long period of time where I was in a really dark spot and I was really ill and not getting off the couch, not moving, just not really even sure, what my life trajectory was going to be. But then that's when I think I first recognized of like, all you can do is what you can control. That's what you have control of. And there's so many outside forces that aren't fair. You have no control over, but you have to move forward because, or else you let that limit you. And so, with that process began still getting back to my normal life, trying to do what I could. I remember walking around the block for the first time without assistance was really hard. I slept for like 10 hours after that. But those little pieces of just picking yourself up and moving forward, and recognizing that that's what I could control. I could control how I approached my day. I couldn't control the cancer in my body. I couldn't control the treatment that I was receiving. And so anyway, I don't mean to belabor on that, but I think reflecting on this campaign journey, it really came to light in that as well. So in any case, this opportunity came to run for statewide office. It kind of came fast and furious and not something that I was necessarily planning for or expecting. Yes. Do you want me to move? Oh, thank you. Prayed a lot about it, talked a lot with my family and support system. I think the number one thing in setting yourself up to run for office is that support system. So number one, your family, right? I mean, I know we've probably in this conference talked about that a lot, right? If you don't have the support of your family and those around you, it's just not possible. When I told my husband we'd been living apart for the last 8 years, because I put him through medical school and to say, okay, I'm going to go do this crazy thing. Oh, and by the way, if I'm elected, I'm going to take a 50% pay cut. And recognizing too, how much time I'd be away, the scrutiny that comes with that. So having his support was going to be huge. Having the support of my employer to be able to run a statewide campaign was tremendous. And the ability to do that, I couldn't have. In a lot of instances, you'd have to give up your job, which is scary because if you lose the election, you're out of a job when you're running at the statewide level. And so the support of my employer to say, do this, we'll work with you. You can work in the evenings or the off hours. We're going to make this work. We support you in doing this. So that was huge to have that support of my employer. And so I did continue working full time while campaigning. And so that support system is number one. Then when you make that decision to run, that support system, your team within the campaign is equally as important. I think there's a lot of women that I've heard that say, I'm just gonna do this alone, or I'm just gonna do it on my own, to do it myself. And it's just not possible. Especially in today's world, you have to put so much into this. And so I would have not been successful if it weren't for a strong team. And we were small, but we were mighty. And so having a campaign manager, I had a full-time college intern that clearly wasn't doing it for the money, just for the experience. So I think that was key to have those and really to have kind of a cabinet level group surrounding me that was giving me input and I was working with. So that team is really critical. And then the second one is fundraising. And I know everyone says that, but I cannot stress enough how big of a component fundraising and money is. And I don't have a trust fund. I'm not independently wealthy. I come from a ranching family where, we've lost the ranch, almost lost a ranch a couple of times, right? I'm not independently wealthy. And that's really difficult, especially running a statewide campaign because they're expensive. You get upwards of almost $500,000. And without money, you're unable to share your message. And when you can get your message out there, at least you can connect to voters and give that a chance. But if they can't hear your message, then you're not going to be successful. And so that's really hard. And the hardest part is asking for money and fundraising. And it's all, nobody likes to do it. But my time was better spent in a lot of ways on the phone, fundraising and asking for money. And we had hundreds of individual donors, which was pretty incredible. Because like I said, not being independently wealthy myself or my family, we had to do it in a grassroots manner. And I didn't know if it was going to be possible, to be honest, because you don't know what to expect. And if people are willing to do that. And I was just really humbled by the amount of support across the state, $5 donations, $10, $100, not big tickets, but all of that mattered so much. And so that grassroots support and fundraising is what was really, really pivotal, I think, for my campaign. And then that leads into the messaging that, of course, you know, with fundraising, you want to be able to get your message out. When people hear your message, then they know that they support you. And so I think that piece is staying true to your message too, and making sure that you decide what your message is going to be. And you can go down a million rabbit holes, but you have to stay true to your message and what you believe. And I did that. I can say honestly that from day one, I stayed true to my message. I'm staying true to that now, being in office as I work my strategic plan. It's just really important to me to stay true to that, because I think that credibility, that integrity, keeping your word, your mission to voters is just really important. And I think a lot of folks feel that politicians might be disingenuous because that message does falter in different ways. So that one really huge. And then back to this whole concept of what's within your control. And that's really, really difficult, especially on the statewide level. There's a lot of challenges, particularly as a female running for office. There can be the most wild things made up about you. I mean, that you can't even fathom. And to have to sit back, and you can't really fight it. It's hard. You can't respond to that. You can only control your message and what you get out to people. But just it's challenging. And so, you know, you don't want to sugarcoat it, because I mean, social media is a difficult place to be campaigning. I tried to stay off of it and have my campaign manager manage everything, because I didn't want to see that ugliness. It wasn't good for my heart, and it wasn't helpful. But you can't stay away from it completely. And there's some really awful things that people have the courage to only say online. There were some really, really awful comments about my body, about how I looked, even from women, from men and women alike. And it's really hurtful, and it's harmful, right? I think it'd be a lot easier pill to swallow with someone who disagrees with my values or my policies. But that's not what it's about in some of these areas. And it's very difficult, because you can let that consume you, and you forget about all the incredible things people are saying about you, and you focus on those one things. And like I said, I mean, things that are so untrue that you can't even begin to push back on them. I mean, just absurd. I learned last week that I have a daughter that works in publishing in DC, and I think I must have had her when I was 11. But anyway, it's just wild. And so I think you have to recognize that that's the reality, right? It's not going to be easy, and there's going to be awful, heinous things that could be said about you. I mean, especially at the state level. And it's really awful. I think you just have to recognize what you can control. And that's what brought me peace in all those ways. And there's so much, like I said, that's not fair. And that's not, you know, you're not on the same playing field. You're like, I did all this right. And I've done, this is what I believe. And I'm staying true to my message. I'm doing all these things. But at the end of the day, like, there's things out of your control that's the reality of the environment. So for me, it was staying above that, and really staying true to who I was and what my values were, which was really important to me. And then, you know, I think like setting boundaries too within the campaign. One thing I could control, I knew this from the outset. I said, I can control how hard I work, and I will outwork every single person in this race. And I did that. And I was on the road nonstop, the entire 40,000 miles in my car this summer. And I knew that I could control that. All these other things, right? Money, endorsements, people, rumors, untrue things, can't control it. And so going into election night, I felt, everyone's like, are you so nervous? Did you sleep last night? I said, I slept very well, because I knew I had done literally everything in my power to be elected. And beyond that, that's all you can control. So I hate to keep badgering on that, but it's really, you know, I think helped me to reconcile some of this. So anyway, and then I think just that balance of knowing, you know, your balance, your work-life balance, that sort of thing. Early on in the campaign, my husband and I kind of made a pact that every Sunday I would get home for church so that we could go to church together. I volunteer at my church, very active in it. And that really is a big part of my life. And so even if I had to leave, I remember one day I left Newcastle at like 4 a.m. or something to get back down. And anyway, that was kind of what I set myself to. Now, as the campaign goes on, it gets more and more difficult to be able to do that. But I think having those, you know, set boundaries are really important. And then I guess I would say, and sorry, I'm kind of all over the place. I wanted this to just be kind of a casual conversation, but I think all of this is really important to know and to digest, because we need more people. We need good people to run for office at all areas. Our school boards, you know, I talk education policy. some of the most important work in education is at the school board level. We've got to have great people at the school boards. We have to have them in local governments. I mean, these are critically important positions. And I'm really glad that you guys are all here and part of this because it's just so important. So anyway, that's kind of an overview of the campaign. Then I guess I'll go into a little bit education system and what my role is in that and what some of my initiatives are, and then we can open up for questions. So education system in this country. So of course we have the federal level, we have the Federal Department of Education, which is interesting because it's an agency that is not anywhere mentioned in our United States Constitution. And so that's for a different day, my opinion, if we should have a Federal Department of Education, but we have one. And so they require that states submit plans that show how we're going to plan for growth, equity, have a state assessment, those sort of things that they approve. And then they have federal fundings that we can receive, but a lot of requirements and strings attached to those. So that's kind of at the federal level. State level, we have obviously the Department of Education, which I oversee, which sets the content and performance standards. So within a grade level and a subject area, what's required for that student to be able to know and learn. And so we set that as well as the state assessment, and then provide a lot of supports around special education, compliance. We run accreditation. And so we accredit schools and make sure that they're complying with all laws and we work in partnership with them. My view of the State Department is that it should be less regulatory and more support. But that's something we'll be working on in the next couple of years. And then you have the local level, which they have to adhere to those standards, but they can do that in any way that they see fit. So they determine all curriculum, all books. The state constitution actually prohibits the state from mandating books and curriculum. And so that is a very local decision there. And we want that. That's a great thing. We want local control. Our communities are so different. Traveling every corner of the state, that really drove that home for me. And so that's kind of how that works. And I guess I didn't really talk about too, just our different places all across the state, right? And just how important those different communities are, and recognizing that if you run for statewide office, how important and unique they are. And for me, I was fortunate to live and work in 4 different counties in the state. And so that was really great to have that experience, but you forget how big Wyoming is and how different folks think and work across the state. And that's really important. So anyway, within the State Department of Education, then some of my key initiatives are number 1, parental empowerment. And to me, that means increasing information, access to information for parents, being more transparent, and also creating as many choices as possible for our parents and our families. Second is better preparing kids for jobs. As Annie described in my bio, I spent the majority of my career in the private sector in oil and gas and coal, and then recognizing that we still have a gap between our education system and government, which all too often, education government really does lag behind the speed and innovation of our private sector. So better preparing kids for jobs, creating more career pathways, certification options, making sure that our education system is less about a one-size-fits-all model and really specializing that. It's less about how much time a kid spends in a particular class in a chair, but really what competency that they're gaining, what knowledge they are, and that when they leave high school, they're ready to jump full speed into a career or into college. And then third, for me, is getting government out of the classroom. And that's everything from political bias and agendas to removing red tape and bureaucracy. We simply, our education system fails if we have political bias and agendas. And so we need to ensure that that doesn't occur here in Wyoming, and that we avoid that to the highest extent possible. And then as far as it goes for bureaucracy, we've got to get back to a place where our teachers can focus on teaching. And reduce a lot of this administrative burden that we have, coming from the private sector and seeing that firsthand at the department. We have a lot of work to do to really create more flexibility. With flexibility comes innovation, and that's what we need in our education system. And so really working on promoting that as well. So those are kind of the 3 key areas. I'm working right now on putting together a strategic plan. I'm not usually a big fan of those because I think there's a lot of time and effort and a big, thick piece of paper that goes on a shelf forever, but I think it's really important to stay true to that message that I shared with you. I want voters to see exactly how I'm delivering on the promises I made on the campaign trail, because that's part of why I ran, was to make sure that we have politicians in place that are delivering on those messages and not just about talking about the issues or yelling loudly about those issues, but really getting down to them. And these are tough issues, right? That we face in every level of government. But that's why we have to have thoughtful people that run for office and are willing to roll up their sleeves and really get to work. These are really difficult. But that's why I did the job, and I plan to deliver on that. So I think that that's really important part of, as I gather, my first few months here in office. So I was kind of all over the place there. I did not. Okay. And so I just kind of threw everything at you. And so I would love to take questions and discuss anything else further. So. Yes.
You listed your strategic plan, which is fantastic. How do you see the legislature approaching that as they enter the interim? Are you hoping for any interim topics, or are there interim topics that you will be watching, things of that nature?
Great question. And something that I've thought a lot about in the last, 7 weeks since being in office. You always recognize like our democracy is incredible, right? And how our founding fathers set up this balance of power. But I think now being in this position, it really holds true. And as frustrated as I might be sometimes with the legislative branch, and they probably are with the executive branch, our founding fathers set up this incredible system of checks and balances that I'm really experiencing even more so than I ever did, even working for the department, seeing in action. And that's really important part, right? That I have this executive branch as a statewide elected official, but the legislature holds all the purse strings, and they're the lawmakers around these issues. And so I can do a lot in my position, but I cannot create law. I can't create that enforcement. And so we have to partner together in this, and it's really important. And that's what I'm really excited about. I've really partnered with a lot of legislators this session. We've had ongoing dialogue about bills, how we make it better, how we work together on this, and have really loved that relationship. I think that's extremely important for us to have. And so we've been hand in hand with current bills. The interim process is another great one. So we will be bringing some of those as proposed interim topics. And then others looking within my agency of what I can do. And so right now it's balancing, okay, what engagement do we need to have on the legislative side? And then what can we do within the bounds of the office? And so that's what we're exploring, but that partnership is huge. I mean, you can only be so successful as your other branches in government. And that's the beautiful thing about democracy. But that means too, that you have to have those good relationships. And that's probably something too, that I should have mentioned with campaigning, these relationships matter. And, when you go to run for statewide office, I mean, gosh, girls that I went to girls' state with senior year of high school that I met for a weekend, they helped me on the campaign. People that I volunteer with at my church, people that I knew from college Republicans stepped up and helped me. I mean, all these pieces of your life, they all connect when you go to run, and it matters how you treat people, and it matters those relationships that you have with people. Because later on you come to run for something like that, they're going to remember who I was in high school, who I was, there's a lot of people who move in from out of state. And sometimes I think that would be easier when they run for office. For me, being multi-generation here my whole life, like I can't fake it. There's too many people in this building that have known me since I was a kid, have known me through when I was lobbying here in the coal industry. And I think that's important. I like to think it is. And so those relationships, whether it's through branches of government, whether it's people across the state, they're all very important.
I have a campaign question.
Yes.
For the next session, we're talking about campaign managers. What were some of the qualities you were looking for in a campaign manager, and how did you kind of decide who to choose for your campaign manager?
That's a great question. And it's difficult to do because you're basically wanting to hire someone for a very high stress, high level job for a very short amount of time. And you don't know if you're going to make it through the primary to even have them on contract for the general. And so how you find someone that's willing to do that, it might require giving up, their current job, or that they have the capacity to do that. I feel very fortunate that I had a longstanding relationship with who became my campaign manager. We had worked on Cynthia Lummis's campaign together. And so I had known her from experience and working campaigns. She'd worked several other high-level campaigns, including that for Sam Galeotis for governor. And so, kind of began visiting with her about that, but also recognizing that, like, I don't know if I can pay you and I don't know when. And so finding someone that you have that relationship and that really believes in your message. And I think that is the number one thing with all of this, of finding people that really believe in what you're doing, because that's the type of person that's going to work that hard for you and really believes in that. And so I remember her often saying that of like, I believe in what you're doing. I believe in your values and your mission, and I want to be a part of that. But I just think that that's so critical. And I know that in the past, some statewide campaigns have shied away from that or said, I'll just do it by myself. It worked fine. I just think we're in a different environment. I think campaigns cost a lot more money. I think reaching voters becomes more and more important and different. And so having a campaign manager for a statewide election, I think is absolutely critical. And so finding someone that you trust irrevocably, that's number one, I think, in beginning. And that's your whole cabinet, right? Your campaign cabinet. And that's even now with my team, with my executive team. It has to be people that I can trust without a shadow of doubt, because you can't, that's intangible. And so I think trust is huge in all of this. And then finding someone that's willing to believe in your message and to do it for not knowing, what that might entail. So, and there are people out there that believe in this, and they believe in doing things behind the scenes, and they believe in people that want to run for office that maybe they couldn't. And so it's all about identifying those. Yes.
How did you handle like endorsements and endorsement processes from organizations, but also from individuals? And just, I think I've seen in some campaigns, especially on the legislative level, where folks have said, like, I'm not accepting any endorsements, but it's also sometimes out of your control. So how do you handle those conversations and also the optics of that sometimes?
Yeah, and that's really hard. And there are a lot of folks that say, I'm not going to take private donations, or I'm not going to take from PACs. Well, if I didn't mention it before, I don't have a trust fund, and I am not independently wealthy. And so, that wasn't really on the table for me. Like, I needed to raise money. And again, you're not going to cross that line of something you don't believe in, right? That those values aren't there, of course. But I think it's always easier said than done to say, I'm not going to accept any PAC dollars. I mean, it's difficult. Like I said, these are expensive. We spent almost $500,000 on a statewide race that was for one of the 4 statewide, not gubernatorial. And so, but they can be tricky too, because again, they can be so out of your control. So President Donald Trump endorsed my opponent, and I never got the chance to talk to, I'd been a Trump supporter in the past. I never got that chance. I don't know if he even met with my opponent. That was out of my control, because there was a slate offered, and that was totally out of my control. Didn't have to do with my policies, my values, whether I was equipped for the job. And that's a challenge, you have to overcome that. But again, not in my control. What was in my control was those developing hundreds of people in the state of Wyoming that have known me for all the years I've lived here and worked here, and they know exactly, what they'll get from me. And so building up that list of my own and people that believed in me is important. And it also, it's hard. A lot of people, especially in elected positions, they shy away from endorsing. And I think that's too bad, because it's important. And we need people to step up and to get behind people who they think are best for the job. Even though we're a small state, it's, you rely on that. And it really shows who's willing to go to bat for you or not. But it's a difficult thing for sure. And again, so much out of your control that you can't do whatsoever. And even with the Trump deal, I remember, we tried to get to their office and set my materials, and they're like, oh yeah, she does seem like a really good, better candidate. We already committed. I mean, that literally happened. Nothing I can do. So it's difficult. So you just navigate as best you can. Yes.
I had a question. So do you recall the moment that you decided to run? And then what were some of the first few steps that you took after you've made that decision?
So for me, it's a little bit more difficult, because there was a vacancy process that I put my name forward in. Which was another interesting experience, because again, things are made up about you that you just can't control. I think someone in that meeting was telling folks that my master's thesis was in critical race theory. My master's thesis was the elasticity of demand between coal and natural gas. So close, but not too close. Anyway, so I kind of thought about it in that sense, right? Putting in for that, I knew what that would mean, would be running later on. And so, you know, I think after that experience, I just wasn't going to be bogged down by that rumor. So that very rumor, I believe caused me to not be in that group of 3 that was selected. Okay. And I'm not okay with that because it was not accurate. And so I think I always knew from putting in with that position that I was going to give it a go, because also to me, the people of Wyoming are the ones who get to make the decision on our elected officials. And so that to me, I thought, you know, I'm going to give that a go. And so, but again, talking to my husband a lot about it, right? Because it impacts your family so very much. And then looking at, yeah, can I fund this? Can I, you know, what does this look like? It's, I think, a gradual process until you know, finally commit that this, and a lot of people encouraging me too. I know as women, we hear those stats about how many times you have to be encouraged to run for office. I mean, it's true, right? And there were so many people across the state that called me and encouraged me to run. And that at that point, it just really solidified my decision. Alex.
Can you dive into that $500,000 a little bit more? Is that, you paid your campaign manager, I would assume?
Yes. She was the only paid person. My intern was not paid. You know, it's everything from your digital. I think our biggest, and you have to decide, you know, where you're going to allocate those resources and where the biggest areas are, because you can't do it all. I mean, even with that kind of expenditure, we weren't in newspapers. We were only on TV and in 2 communities. But digital was really important and doing that. And so spending money on digital, I mean, everything, you know, at that last summer to fill my car up was over $100. You can't find I was in Rollins one night and I was staying at like a very subpar hotel and it was over $100. I mean, you know, and so it just, and man, we would cut costs like crazy and just, do what we could. But yeah, I mean, it's spread through all of that and it just, it goes quick, but I think having a budget, so that is huge. So from day one, we sat down and we budgeted out and I even went like half-month increments of what we were going to cost out of that. And then it got to the point too of like, okay, if I don't raise the money, then I can't spend it. And because again, I didn't have that personal income to be able to do that. And so you have to just gauge of like, be okay with that, because you don't know if that money's going to come in. But that budgeting is huge because you have to know, and prioritizing where you think it's best to reach your voters, depending on what demographic or what race that you're running. And so for me, it was really digital, was kind of, you know, was the future of that. And it's a lot cheaper than print and television. And then at the end we hit TV because we had money. I saved that to the end. It was like, okay, what's those last 2 weeks? What are we going to do in those? You know, and it's all about deciding too. You don't want to start too early. How do you do that? And so it's piecing that together. And there's no perfect formula. You do the best you can and you budget it that way. Yes.
We have a question from Cynthia online. How did you build your team and your cabinet?
Great question. So that's actually been pretty easy for me, simply because a lot of that team I worked with previously at the department, and fortunately they stayed through the transition. And so those are people, again, number one is people that you can irrevocably trust, because that is the most important, more so than any skill set that they bring to the office, because you have to be in this together. And honestly, I mean, it's funny. I knew from working at the Department of Education how important your team is, but now even more so. I mean, as an elected official, and when you're campaigning, you're by yourself on the campaign trail and you're talking, I'm going to do this, you know, you name it. You can't do any of that without a solid team. As one person, you just don't have the capacity. And so having a team and having people for that matter as stakeholders, you know, that can be assisting you and helping you along the way also. And so fortunately for me, a lot of the team that was already there were folks that I knew and trusted and had worked with, and that have been friends of mine for a really long time. And so that was kind of how I went about building my team. So we didn't really have to transition. We just hit the ground running, which is a really great place to be, because they brought expertise from the classroom, from the department, as well as already a relationship with me. But I think the other thing that I wanted to be sure of, and this is where I'm trying to surround myself also in all the works and task forces that we do is recognizing where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are. I'm not a teacher by trade. I'm not an expert in the classroom. And so I recognize that in education policy, I need to have those around me that are on the ground level and doing the teaching. And so it's important to have in my executive team, folks that have been in the classroom, that were in leadership in the districts, but also balancing that with my business experience and having heard from voters all across the state. So I think recognizing where your weaknesses are and filling those with people that have those strengths. And that's the beauty of having a team, is that you can balance each other and bring all those skills.
So when you decide to run, do you end up being at that point like a business owner? Because your payroll, do you take care of the payroll and all of that with the funds that come in?
Great question. And something that I had to kind of navigate, right? Because you're like, oh my gosh, how do I do this? And even with taxes right now, we're still figuring, getting that all sorted. But no, you create your campaign committee is what you do. And so, and that might be too, I don't know if there's a session you guys do on that, but even just working through with like Secretary of State and then figuring out how you get your EIN and all of those things. And so that's what you do. And then we kind of figured it out as we went, and then asking people that had gone through it and knew what they were doing. And so that's an important piece, because you want to make sure that all your ducks are in a row. And that was very important to me. I remember even at one time, someone's like, do you really need to list these balloons as an expenditure? And I was like, heck yes, I do. Like, that is very important to me, to make sure that we're doing everything by the book. And so you do have to record every one of your expenses. You upload those as well as your donations. And then there's different filing times. And so that was the other thing and God bless Google Docs, because my campaign manager and I would be on, different ends of the state, but we'd be putting in these expenditures, and we had this Google sheet where we would be working on that, and then we'd like highlight it if it had been uploaded in the recording and all of that. So I think being ultra organized is important, because would some people not get caught? Maybe, but for me, that just wasn't even an option. And so that organization level is really, really important, and making sure that you have everything accurate when you report. So because the people, the voters, the taxpayers, they deserve to see that, and that it's available for a reason.
Thank you.
Alex.
Is that spending something that the voters are holding you accountable for, or is it the law? Like, if you decided, I need a pair of shoes for door knocking, is that the law prohibiting you? Or
And I should also add that you don't have to report travel. And so all of that just came out of my pocket. Like, I just paid for all that. I think it ended up being, I don't know personally what I put into the campaign. Tens of thousands of dollars. So that doesn't have to be recorded. So it's those kind of things. I don't know. I don't know how much the public looks at that. I guess I don't have anything to hide. So I'm like, everybody look at it. That's fine. I was very frugal and made sure that we use that in proper ways. I know there was some scrutiny for some legislative races in that way, that use those expenses for certain things. I'm just never even going to get close to that line, because it's not for me. So.
No more questions? And no more online? Okay, well then I think we will call it.
Thank you guys very much for having me.
Thank you, Superintendent. Sorry. Thank you so much. Let me grab this for you. We really appreciate you coming and joining us this morning. It was so lovely to have you.